Welcome to the Hungry Heracross, where we rank, analyze, and create all things Zelda and Pokemon. Skyward Sword is a great game with a heartfelt story, stunning soundtrack, and memorable dungeons, aspects that are generally well received by most Zelda fans. However, one of the more divisive aspects of this game are the bosses. While Skyward Sword has some of the most iconic fights and villains in the series, it's also perceived as having some of the worst. But are these battles as good, or as bad, as people say they are? Well, in today's video, we're going to discuss each main boss, as we rank them from worst to best. With each entry on this list, I'm going to talk about what the boss does particularly well, and some suggestions for how it could be improved. For clarification, I am going to include the Levi's Spilosite fight, which borders on being a major boss, and I'm also separating the fights against Ghirahim and The Imprisoned. But before we jump into the countdown, I'd love it if you could subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and share it with a friend. With all that out the way, we've got 12 bosses to rank, so let's jump to it. The Imprisoned is often included in lists of the worst Zelda bosses, but does it deserve to be there? Well, both the design of and battle against the Imprisoned aren't even close to the worst in the series. But look at these encounters individually, and this third fight, it's a stinker. It's hard to think of a more unnecessary, forced upon you boss that also somehow fails to progress the plot. To set the scene, after beating the Fire Sanctuary, which is the second last dungeon of the game, you face the Imprisoned for the second time. Go straight to fight Spilosite, before going back to fight the Imprisoned for the third time. Yeah, you can do some side quests as you go, but there's no new areas or main story quests between these fights. So not only does this fight suffer from pacing issues, it also suffers from being a repeat of a battle you probably finished no more than an hour prior. Perhaps this could have worked if the third Imprisoned rematch differed substantially from the second, but it doesn't. The only change in the fight is that the beast now levitates, and you get fired from the Gruesinator. Some awesome things, but not enough to warrant the third battle. What's worse is that the fight doesn't even impact the story. Whilst the first two had significant plot points tied with it, this one seems like an excuse to have the player land in the sealed grounds ahead of entering a flooded barren woods. But the issue here is that Fire's the one who's directed you there, not the Imprisoned dragging you in, akin to Zelda falling to the surface in the early portions of the game. It's truly baffling why this battle even exists. Were they trying to force the rule of 3? Or did they just feel like extending the game by a handful of minutes? I don't know, but whatever the reason was, it didn't work, and it's an unfortunate low point in a rather amazing Zelda title. But don't worry, I will have positive things to say when we get to the other fights. Moving on. Without a doubt, Ghirahim is one of the best antagonists in the series, and he shows up in most dungeons of the game, either awakening or being the final boss. But whilst this works most of the time, the fight in the Fire Sanctuary is just a letdown. We see him at his arrogant yet playful self in Skyview, and his chaotic and relentless persona is on show at the sealed grounds. But here, Ghirahim's in this awkward middle phase. His fight doesn't change too much from Skyview, where it's mostly just swinging your sword at the correct angles to land attacks and dodging his occasional charges towards you. Yes, he has more offensive pressure with slight buffs to attacks, but it feels all bark and no bite. He leads by saying that he's got no mercy, yet walks slowly towards you, holding swords in unnatural positions, allowing you to easily hit him. If perhaps he showed a bit more aggression in his attacks, or even if his dialogue matched his output, this fight may have been okay. The biggest positive of this battle is that it's nice to see his design start to change, with the black impenetrable form slowly creeping in. As lackluster as the fight is, it does work well for the story. So perhaps it could have worked if the fight started against Ghirahim, and then after taking a few hits he learns where the gate is, subsequently leaves, and awakens the true boss of the Fire Sanctuary. Best of both worlds. Spilosite stands out as the only battle to incorporate the Loftwing. and throughout the first phase, you need to spiral charge the parasite's eyes. If you don't like flying in this game, then perhaps this duel isn't going to be your favourite. Whilst I am a fan of including flying into a boss battle, I was underwhelmed with how it was done. Throughout the first phase, the only real threat to you is poor flying and crashing into Levias. I think this could have been improved if Bylosite started attacking you when he had lost about half his eyes, or if the second phase still involved the Loftwing in some way. However, instead, once the eyes have easily been taken care of, you drop down onto Levias to engage in a classic match of Dead Man's Volley, or Zelda Tennis. It's a great use of the motion controls and a nice rendition of a recurring battle style. However, it's still a relatively bare fight. The projectiles aimed at you feel quite slow, and there isn't any tension or sense of urgency that you get with most other battles. It doesn't help that Bylosite's design is a little lackluster. Aside from the frills in the final fight, it's just tentacles with eyes on each end. I don't mind the whole tentacle aspect, but at this point in the game, I've seen enough unnecessary eyes used as weak points. The boss also suffers from its placement in the game, much like I discussed earlier with the third Imprisoned fight. Perhaps with better pacing and better use of the Loftwing, this could have been an amazing fight. Moldarak has a great design. It's a fierce scorpion that has multiple ways to hurt Link, mainly with its long tail and strong pincer claws. The boss feels intimidating, and it has enough resemblance to the standard enemies you face throughout the dungeon, but also has enough unique characteristics to stand out on its own. For the fight itself, the boss has two phases, the first where you need to slice the eyes between the claws, and then the second where you gotta stab the arachnid in its main eye. The slight critique I have with this is that the eyes within the claws just don't need to be there. I feel that as a series, The Legend of Zelda overdoes it with the eye being the weak spot, and I feel that they are unnecessary. Keep the same structure for the boss, just give us something other than eyes. At points in the battle, it'll go under the sand and you need to use the dungeon item to force it out of hiding. It's a great way to incorporate the gust bellows into a fight without having the mechanic of blowing something onto the enemy to damage it. In saying that though, I think that blowing something into the arachnid would have been a fun concept to explore. I do enjoy this fight and it's a step up from the ones discussed, but it just feels a little bit bland compared to the remaining entries on this list. Skyward Sword spices things up, with the first boss of the game being one of the main antagonists. As a character, Ghirahim is fascinating, an embodiment of Demise's sword, hell-bent on resurrecting his master. At this stage of the game, he's still relatively tame, having not yet descended into madness. He's arrogant and isn't taking the hero seriously. But whilst this all helps build a captivating story with a tremendous cinematic, it does hinder the boss fight. In the first phase, the Demon Lord doesn't launch an onslaught at Link, but rather moves slowly towards the hero, trying to catch the Master Sword. The battle acts as a tutorial for wielding your mighty blade, as you need to swing it from a certain direction to land a hit. It's fine, but we've already learnt this against the mini-boss. As the battle develops, Ghirahim does put on some more offensive pressure with some neat attacks, but because he's just toying with Link, there's no tension. So whilst everything around the fight is amazing, the duel itself is a little too uneventful for my liking, even for an opening boss. In the later portions of the Earth Temple, a giant ball rolls towards you, which you need to outrun and then later dodge. As the ball begins to crack open, it's revealed to be the dungeon boss, and I think these cinematics lead to one of the best enemy introductions in the series. Initially, Scaldera looks like a meatball who wouldn't be out of place in the Overcooked series. But as the fight progresses, it loses its crusty exterior to reveal itself as one fiery hexapod. It might not be the most breathtaking of designs, but it marries well with the fire level you've just traversed and the setting for which you fight it. The concept of throwing a bomb into a boss's mouth to defeat it isn't new for the Zelda series, or bosses of fire-themed dungeons for that matter, but it's a fun take. The added components of using bombs to stop Scaldera from running up to you dodging its fireballs and moving out the way of its rolling attacks are all enjoyable elements of the fight. Does it need an eye to be slashed? Probably not, but it's not as offensive here as it gets in later battles. I wouldn't want to see much more from the second boss, but if I could add something, it'd be nice to see some fire shooting up from the lava pit below onto the platform you stand on. It would increase the challenge whilst building on the fire-themed gym and enemy. Although the third encounter against the Imprisoned is an unnecessary nuisance, the first two fights are fantastic and don't get the props they deserve. Being a sealed, much weaker version of Demise, I feel that the Imprisoned's design is appropriate. While sometimes the scaly body resembles a walking avocado, it also comes across as a mythical egg, waiting to be cracked open, expelling the pure evil within. It adds to the tremendous story that the first two times this beast is freed, our heroes need to fight together to confine it. Most notably in this second encounter, it facilitates Groot's development into a protagonist. It's one of the few fights in the series to have Link work alongside other characters not named Zelda, and it works really well. Both battles are similar, where the aim is to stop the Imprisoned from reaching the sealed temple. I love the fact that this boss has a time limit associated with it, and that if you take too long, it's game over. To stop the giant beast, you need to strike the pillar into its head 3 times. It's another great design choice to have multiple ways to do this. You can either slash out its toes to make the beast fall, or land on its head by dropping from a higher level. The key difference between the fights is that the second one involves Groot using his Grootinator to help stop the beast. Naturally, this inclusion puts the second fight marginally ahead of the first, but they're both of high quality. But even as good as these two fights are, they are a bit too similar for many people's liking. The way I would have liked to see this fight improve is by removing the third fight altogether and adding in the Groot catapulting Link into the second duel. It would have also been nice to spice up the sealed grounds to look and play a little bit different, perhaps with more obstacles or a notable shift in the lighting. That way, the two remaining fights would feel more unique. I don't think there's a better opening to a boss battle than Tentalus. As you enter the final room, the ship becomes under attack. Tentacles rise through the floor and water seeps in, setting a sense of urgency to get out before it becomes a shipwreck. On your ascent, you get to dodge barrels and use skyward strikes, all whilst trying not to drown. It's an epic few minutes. By the time you reach the top, you're ready for a fight against a fearsome creature of the sea, but what you get is some goofy Monsters Inc. character. There's no denying that this design is widely regarded as disappointing and underwhelming, but it's still decent. Yes, a Kraken or an Octorok would have been super fitting, but making a Medusa-esque boss with snake tentacles for hair does work. It could have been a lot better if the face and body lent more into that mythological woman, similar to what is done in Oracle of Seasons. But at least Tentalus is memorable, right? Alternative wishes for the design aside, my favourite element of Tentalus is how, during the second phase, its tentacles come at you as if it's snakes. It's quite fitting and oh so satisfying to slash away at these before landing the final blow. But before all of that, there's an equally exciting first phase that involves using skyward strikes and shooting arrows. All the elements in this fight work wonders, and the setting for the showdown is a beautiful set piece. A fight I always look forward to and a fine way to cap off a tremendous dungeon. It's just not quite there to reach the top 3. Up until the final encounter, Ghirahim has been slowly descending into madness. With each defeat, he became angrier, more frantic, and downright scary, which is part of the reason why he is so beloved as a character. When you meet him in the sealed grounds, he's almost completed his ritual to revive Demise. His body turns completely into a metallic black that's immune to your sword attacks, and it's pretty clear only one of you are leaving this fight alive. The first phase takes place on platforms created by Ghirahim itself, many levels above ground. it's coupled with a dramatic theme that raises the tension lacking in the previous encounters against him. I love the concept of having to continually knock him down the platform, landing a satisfying finishing blow each time you do. Then, when on the ground for the second phase, you have yet another sword fight, but this time the Demon Lord is all out offensive. There's no mucking about, and I'm all for that. I love these kinds of battles where the enemy just wants to destroy you and isn't giving you any nonsensical free hits. By the end of the duel, Ghirahim has served his purpose to the story, becoming Demise's blade, but it's not before he leaves you with one of the best fights in the game. Final bosses don't get much more epic than the climactic showdown with Demise. The conclusion to Skyward Sword sees you fight the evil incarnate in a picturesque distant realm. Seriously though, this place is stunning, and when Demise turns the sky from a gorgeous blue to an eerie grey, it gives me goosebumps. The fight is a step above the last one with Ghirahim in almost every way. The first phase is an epic sword fight that can be an actual challenge for once. You need to try and get in a few hits before Demise deals some massive damage to you with attacks of his own. After many hits, the fight kicks up a gear as Demise summons lightning throughout the battlefield. Aside from making the background awe-inspiring, these storms enable both Link and Demise to use Skyward strikes. The second phase has you trying to hit Demise with one of these strikes, all while avoiding the ones he sends to you. It's an entertaining duel that ends with a rewarding finishing blow to the being of pure evil. Demise is one of the more imposing final bosses in the series. He looks physically stronger than almost any other humanoid character, and throughout his dialogue, it's clear that he's a despicable, ruthless being. His final fight is an apt reflection of this, and there's nothing I'd want to see changed. It's challenging, it uses the game's main mechanic, and it's complemented with an incredible soundtrack and a serene battleground. And most of all, it's a lot of fun. It's just that there's a boss in this game that's pretty much perfect. Was there really any doubt? The phenomenal Guardian of the Ancient Cistern is far and away my favourite boss in Skyward Sword, and a contender for my favourite in the series. It has everything I want in a boss fight. A memorable design that's fierce and intimidating, a picturesque setting, an engaging soundtrack that complements the boss, and of course, an epic and enjoyable fight that keeps you on your toes. It even incorporates the use of the dungeon item alongside your swordsmanship, which is a huge positive. It's truly hard to find any fault with Coloctus, so let's just continue with the positives. I really like how this boss does its best to protect its weak spot. In the first phase, it uses 2 of its 6 arms to hide the center, and it's not until you've dislodged 2 arms that it then tries for an attack that leaves itself vulnerable. But then when realizing that this is ineffective, Coloctus stands up, locks its weak spot in a cage, and you can't do anything about it. The only way to deal damage is by using its own powerful sword against it. There's just something about wielding a weapon that's way too big for Link that brings so much joy. You can even have the option of trying to play it safe, breaking off all 6 arms in the second phase before attacking, or just risk it all and go in for the kill as soon as you're holding one ancient sword. It truly is one of the best fights the Zelda series has to offer, but how could it be improved? Well, the only thing I could think of is to give Moldarak its own theme so that Coloctus doesn't have to share this awesome tune with anything else. There's nothing else I'd want to change for this outstanding confrontation. And that's it, all 12 boss fights in Skyward Sword ranked worst to best. Really, there was 3 bad ones, 3 amazing ones, and 6 kinda in the middle. What changes would you make to the list? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and share the video with a friend. Next up will be a dungeon ranking, so hit subscribe to be notified when that video releases. Whilst you wait, check out some of my other Zelda and Pokemon videos, or follow me on Instagram and TikTok where I post pictures of my plushies and figurines getting up to random shenanigans. But for now friends, stay safe, stay kind, and I'll see you next time on the Hungry Heracross.